Hi everyone, it's Archie here from the QTube. A few weeks ago, I sat down with a few students from the Royal College of Music to discuss their scores for the Creed clip that we've just released. This is a two-part video, first discussing their scores, this is part one, and then part two will be a chat about going to university for music, how they found their experience, what they recommend, and what they think of the wider discussion. Remember, if you want access to this clip, you can get all of our clips for £1 a month over on our website, theqtube.com. Alternatively, you can access the higher tiers, £5 a month. It gets you access to a walkthrough demo of a score that I've done for each clip, and then £10 a month gets you access to the logic file, the AAF file, the audio stems and the MIDI file for each of those demo scores that I've done, plus feedback once a month on a piece of your choosing. So yeah, this is part one of the video. I hope you enjoy. Hi everyone, I'm here with 4 students at the Royal College of Music to discuss their scores for one of the newest QTube clips, the Creed. This is a great clip about how being a boxer relates to being a chess player, reading your opponent and attacking. It's available now on the QTube website for £1 a month. Guys, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Toby. I'm a composer from London, and I'm going into my second year masters at the RCM. I started from piano, so I did classical piano and then moved into jazz piano, and so I've got a love of sort of interesting chords and melodies and that kind of thing. So that's sort of where I draw a lot of inspiration in my music.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Lewis. I'm a second year master's student here, which means that probably by the time this video goes out, I would have graduated by now. It's a little bit scary, but hey ho. But yeah, I was actually trying to make it as a professional singer, classical singer initially. But yeah, unfortunately my voice just wasn't very good. So I thought maybe composition, film composition, because I was interested in it like in my late teens, but I never really followed through at that point. So I thought maybe now's the time to give it a shot. And yeah, the last 2 years have been really like excellent, and it's kind of made me realize that it's something that perhaps there's something that I can do here. So yeah, that's me.
Hello, my name is Leah Tatjana. I am going into second year at the Royal College of Music, also doing a master's in composition for screen. I'm from South Africa originally, so it's been quite the adjustment coming to move to London. I did a classical undergrad in music, specifically sort of more experimental composition, focusing on sort of more avant-garde textures and stuff like that. So that's kind of where I come from, and I think implementing that in my scores has become sort of fundamental to the way I approach stuff. Yeah, but I was a singer and I played violin for a couple of years, so that's sort of the musical background.
Hi everyone, my name is Jack. I am a undergrad composer here going into my final year. Previously, before I came to the RCM, I was a trumpet player. That's kind of fallen by the wayside to make way for composition. So my undergrad here is actually just in straightforward, normal composition, so to speak, but I also study composition for screen as a second study, which has been really fun.
Amazing. Thanks so much, guys. Shall we have a little look at your scores? Yeah, great. Yeah. Who do we want to start with? Who wants to go first?
Maybe we could go like this.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Life. It's difficult. It can get too much. Leave you behind. There always comes the moment of choice. And I made mine. I chose to fight. In boxing, we have Creed. The Warrior's Creed. It's like a game of chess. The preparation. Hone your skills. Develop your weapons. Get faster, stronger, smarter. Know your enemy. burned.
Thank you. Yeah, so I kind of wanted with this one, to me, there were these two clear sections narratively. We had the beginning part where he sort of, not got many prospects. And then he starts boxing and suddenly his life sort of turned around. So I wanted to have the starkest contrast probably between those two. So you'll see that sort of beginning part is kind of jazzy, alluding to that kind of noir style cinema, a bit like Taxi Driver and other films of that era. And then afterwards it sort of just goes into epic kind of music. We've got the sort of strategic element of the chess, because that seems to be a dominant feature throughout. So you get that in the sort of second section, a bit more sort of measured and calculated. And then that last section is just a big build up with a lot of emphasis. And I threw in that choir just for to represent the fire, something about that. But yeah, I think I was quite happy with how it sort of came out. So that's sort of how I went about it.
Yeah, no, that was awesome. I was struck straight away by the inclusion of saxophone, alto saxophone, was it? Yeah, alto saxophone and oboe. We're only seeing these for the first time now, so I'm fairly confident we won't see those instruments prop up again. If they do, then great minds, I guess. But there was also some really, really cool. There was some orchestration things that really leapt out at me. I think around like 1 minute 5, 1 minute 10, you had very, very quiet low brass, which just gave some really, really beautiful width. And then once it got to the sort of faster paced training montage, all of that low end kind of disappeared. I don't know if that was like a conscious decision, but again, in terms of like trying to highlight contrast between different sections of the film, I think you handled that like really, really well. I thought it was really, really effective. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so my question is, you took a very narrative approach to the film, which I think is awesome. And you said that you have this clear sort of starting, which you really feel specifically in terms of more like gentle, and then we feel the rhythmic elements come in as you push towards the sort of climax. And specifically sort of the last maybe 40 seconds, you manage to just keep building so that you have that sort of increase. And I was wondering, is there any sort of like particular thing that you found maybe challenging or about creating a continuous sense of build?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it was quite challenging. I suppose I sort of, at some stage, I did have it be quite repetitive. And so, because you've sort of thrown everything in the kitchen sink at it. So so at that point, actually, I started taking stuff away, which I think helped to... I think you'll find in an earlier draft, sort of everything was there right when the montage started, and then it didn't have anywhere to go. So I sort of removed a lot of that.
Completely. It felt like you were doing some sort of like orchestral shepherd's tone, where it's like the illusion of it continuing up, but you've actually started again and you're building. That's kind of what I was finding. So yeah, congratulations. Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, with those sort of things where you have a kind of steady build, I always think they're quite hard to manage because, you have to sort of not reveal too much, but then sometimes when you have started with the full climactic part and then you strip things away, it becomes sort of a bit boring because you've got so many elements that you've got rid of. So yeah, that was really nice, and I thought in terms of kind of the narrative and pacing, it was quite refreshing because I sort of switched the going into the faster stuff at quite a bit of an earlier point in my one, and it was really actually quite nice to see you just holding back for a bit longer. And I think it makes that point where you switch into the kind of faster tempo, get your heart beating a bit quicker stuff, really, really, really interesting. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it helped as well delaying that a little bit because, it can get quite repetitive with that kind of building type music, and so it helped that actually after sort of 2 or 4 bars, something seemed to change in the music, and it was actually quite short in the end. So yeah, it was nice to have that sort of middle part.
Can I also say, like, I don't know about you guys, but I was kind of surprised at how melancholic the opening was.
Me too.
That was really refreshing. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that, and it was really nice. Yeah. I thought it was great.
I'd just say that I think something that stood out to me was that there were no like jarring moments. Like, it's quite easy to, with a clip like this where like things are changing on screen, it's quite easy to have the music like change a lot, but you just manage transitions really well. And yeah, it just all flowed really nicely. So yeah, good job.
Thank you.
Good job.
Life. It's difficult. It can get too much. Leave you behind. There always comes the moment of choice. And I made mine. I chose to fight. In boxing, we have a creed. The Warrior's Creed. It's like a game of chess. Preparation. Hone your skills. Develop your weapons. Get faster, stronger, smarter. Know your enemy. Then make your move. The creed. Don't get burned.
Julia, thank you. So, yeah, actually, I found this very, very tricky to score. It was difficult knowing exactly how to shape the piece alongside the narrative, essentially. The only thing that was very obvious to me from the outset was that with the first 25, 30 seconds of the film being kind of about kind of loss of focus, loss of path, a good way to reflect that was to basically make sure there were no kind of strong rhythmic elements and kind of have this kind of loss of beat or tempo or whatever. And then as soon as the voiceover says, "But I made mine," as in my choice, then that was kind of where a kind of rhythm becomes a little bit more of a feature. I also felt like kind of electronic synthesis was going to be useful tools. And I'm actually not very good at using things like Omnisphere or whatever. So it was kind of a challenge trying to find things that worked. But yeah, I mean, kind of basically aside from that, it was just kind of making something that kind of gives the impression of somebody that is dangerous but calculated in their aggression. That was the kind of feel I wanted to get after the kind of 30-second mark. Somebody that is very, very good at knowing how and when to fight, I guess. I think that's, in terms of the underlying kind of benefit of boxing clubs around the country, it kind of teaches people, not that I would know looking at me, but I've heard that it's able to really instill a sense of discipline and patience, I guess. So that was the kind of thing I wanted to highlight more than anything, I think. So yeah.
I've got a question just about the use of like textures and sort of the more experimental sounds that you used. Was there a specific element of the film that you were like, oh, I'm going to use that as the inspiration? Was it like maybe color? Was it the pacing? Was there some sort of...
There was actually, yeah. So specifically like the fire at the end, I wanted to have a couple of things that sort of foreshadowed that, I guess. So there's one patch called Burning Sensation, which I used, which I think it's maybe it's like cajon played with like brush sticks or something. I can't remember exactly. And then basically elements that have lots of kind of noise in the high end as well. So you get that kind of crackle. And I think also like one thing I did, which I was quite happy with in terms of the way it sounded, was when you get to that faster paced training montage towards the end, I used the same kind of bamboo sticks that I'd used earlier, but pitched down an octave and then bit crushed a little bit. So the tone and the formant in particular kind of lengthens a little bit. So it sounds a little bit more rounded, I guess. But then with the crushed element of it, again, that kind of crackly burning type thing was kind of what I hope came through anyway. But yeah, and also at that point, I also wanted to make sure, sorry, this is not related to the question, but to differentiate it from the earlier section was to have a slight change in the emphasis of the beat. So instead of having like the second bass hit be on like an offbeat semi-quaver, sorry, the rhythm's more straight, essentially. I can't really explain it very well, but if you listen back to it again, like I'm sure you'll be able to pick up on it. So yeah.
Yeah, I thought the textures stood out to me, which we've picked up on, because there were both, correct me if I'm wrong, but electronic textures as well as kind of also orchestral textures, which weren't sort of playing, like there was a sort of solo violin kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
And they definitely, as you were talking, helped to hint towards that kind of almost uncertainty. And you said about aggression of this sort of character, and it's kind of like, you're like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. Like it seems dangerous in a cool way. And I think with the slow motion shots as well, it worked really well.
Yeah, because I think perhaps one thing that was potentially a little bit odd was the first time you hear brass is actually on the close-up of the chessboard. It's kind of a slightly what's the word, esoteric decision. I don't know if that's the right term, but yeah, I think in terms of going back to calculated aggression, the chessboard or the analogies given to chess are the exact kind of reflection of that. So yeah, so there were mixtures of it was horns and trombones. I didn't use any trumpets, I don't think. And then it was just full strings, and to kind of heighten that sense of aggression or danger, the strings, generally speaking, were playing without vibrato, except for those kind of like melodic moments in the violins. But I mean, saying those are melodies is a bit kind of rich. They're literally, it's just kind of like eyes closed, just tap on the keyboard and just whatever works basically. So I'm hoping there was lots of kind of what's the word, like gripping tension, even if it's not necessarily reflected in the harmony, at least in the kind of sound.
And actually, kind of, you already said this a little bit, but there was some really nice kind of textural stuff that I thought you did really well. I mean, because the thing is with sort of hybrid scores is getting the orchestral instruments to blend with the non-orchestral instruments. Yeah. That's quite tricky. I thought you managed that really nicely.
Oh, thank you. Okay, cool.
But some of the things where you sort of had percussive sounds, and I'm guessing some were electronic and some weren't, or kind of coming out of both speakers and kind of using the stereo field. It gave it kind of a nice sort of bit of space, and depth to it, which I thought was quite nice.
I discovered ping pong delay yesterday, and it's pretty cool. Basically, like, so because of my kind of classical upbringing, all of my scoring tends to be kind of traditional orchestral, and my template that I have for my orchestra is essentially everything in place as if you were in a concert hall, sort of fifth row. So it doesn't have that kind of. That's actually another challenge, was trying to get that kind of high-end, hybrid-y sound that you'd expect from a modern production in the orchestral instruments as well. So yeah, that high end needed to like really sizzle, but in a way that wasn't too overbearing. Not sure how well I did with that, honestly, but yeah, I think with the percussion, there were some sound design elements, some kind of. So I still use Storm Drum 2, which is a very archaic East-West instrument, but it's got some great noises on there for sure. And one of them is just like a sampled. I think percussion patch from like an old school Neve or something. I'm not entirely sure how it's made, but that's what's supplying the kind of meatiness of the kick, for example. That's kind of the thing that's dead center, and also some old like hi-hat things. So processed a little bit as well, but yeah, I think also I did manually pan some things as well. I hate doing automation, but it kind of needed it, right? So yeah, I'm glad those were things that kind of seem to work for you, because yeah, like I said, it's kind of it's a new area for me in a way. Yeah.
Wow, that must have been a moment discovering ping pong delay.
It was huge. Yeah.
I was going to say, it's interesting going back to how you said, what was it? You said that it was like kind of difficult clip to score, and that you wanted the shape of the narrative to come through in the music. I think it really did, because to me it was spotted really well. Like I loved it's kind of quite full on in the beginning, and then it kind of drops off, and you get these like hybrid-y sounds coming into the latter half of the piece. And then like, whereas lots of people went for a massive build at the end, I liked how you had a bit more of a gradual build at the beginning, and then it kind of dropped off towards the end, where it's like, you've made the choice. And yeah.
There's always a risk with things, especially if there's sort of like a modern trailer kind of vibe to it, of it becoming a bit relentless.
Yeah.
And normally pacing is something I feel very, very comfortable with, but there was just something about, I think it's just kind of the way that things ended up. I wasn't necessarily too sure if, hitting the cut with the chessboard for the first time, whether that was too much compared to what happened later. I think it worked out okay though, just about, because there were also, in terms of some of the other sounds that we used, I managed to find some like bowed acoustic guitar patch, which had some cool like overtones and stuff to it, which was really cool. The only thing I think was maybe lacking was just going into the shot when the voiceover says, "But I made mine." It needed some high end like drop or rise or something, because I don't have many of those kind of sounds available to me at the moment. So, because also like trailer music is not something I'm hugely fond of, if I'm honest. But in terms of spotting, I'm glad that seemed to work, because it's a difficult thing to do. So actually, like knowing when things should sort of back off a little bit. So hopefully, like with that kind of percussion groove, where there's actually basically no music underneath it, it's just percussion for I think 4 bars. Hopefully that was like an effective moment, because that's probably the bit which gives me stank face. Like it felt good.
Nice,
yeah.
Nice, yeah. Wow, nice one. Woo.
Life. It's difficult. It can get too much. Leave you behind. There always comes that moment. The moment of choice. And I made mine. I chose to fight. In boxing, we have a creed. The Warrior's Creed. It's like a game of chess. The preparation. Hone your skills. Develop your weapons. Get faster, stronger, smarter. Know your enemy. Then, make your move. The creed. Don't get burned.
Yeah, I think I agree with Lewis in terms of it was a bit of a tricky film to score because of the so many changes in pace, so many slow-mos into normal and then slow-mo and then backwards and forwards. And I think, I chose the female voice to use, so moving my stuff just in terms of the mix, being able to really work in the low end because her voice stuck out so well over the top was quite nice. But I think my approach, you boys have taken such a narrative, look at the picture, and I think when I watched it back, I realized I could see the story arc, but it really felt like they were pushing an overall message, right? Motivation, getting yourself into the space where you can feel like you are part of the game and all of those things. So I think I kind of wanted to throw the watcher in from literally 0 seconds, boom, straight into the world. And we've got that beat that evolves and changes, and the percussion is, I wanted to, instead of having sort of this stereotypical electronic like beat, like we're watching a gym video, I added some sort of African kit on top of it so that it was a little bit more textured, and changes in timbre were present. And then we moved from there, and then to have that sort of constant pace there, and then have the pullback when you see the big cinematic sort of swing shot, and it feels like that is a big moment. And then the other big moment I really wanted to hit was the first time the watcher feels engaged is when we get that woman literally punching the camera. And you suddenly feel like, whoa, this is directed towards me. Is this message for me? And that was where like it climaxes. So I think in terms of those sort of things, that was what I aimed to hit, the general mood, the sort of the push and pull of the clip, which is kind of what feels strongest if you watch all those visuals together. Yeah,
I thought I really liked how you pulled back for that last sort of third where we get the shot of the ring, because sort of from then on, because it's, you know, so different in a way. Like I think sometimes with trailers you think of a build up, well at least that's what I thought and did, but it sort of, it gave such a sort of cool I don't know, this sort of intensity about it, because it was so quiet and you could hear the chessboard moving, the pieces moving, and then you could hear the ding of it was very tense, you know. And also I suppose with boxing, you know, that's more realistic, having that sort of like
moment.
There wouldn't be that sort of music being playing, so it's so yeah, it really worked, especially towards the end, and then it's sort of all tied quite nicely. So it was very interesting for that reason.
Yeah, and I mean it was interesting with the different voiceover, because it's actually pacing was quite a bit different, you know, because certain moments where she says certain words, obviously it's the same words, but at kind of slightly different times. So, you know, for us kind of deciding where to hit various points or not, you know, we sort of have the same problems to solve, whereas with the female voiceover, it's certain places where the words are different. It kind of, you know, I can see why that would actually change your sort of approach to the overall pacing actually by quite a lot. So it was really, really interesting to see how you sort of, whereas the kind of three of us, I feel like with the first sort of 30 seconds or so, sort of treated that as a kind of the intro, if you like, to the main gig, whereas you kind of went, you know, sort of through it, you know, maintaining what you're saying was just an overall message rather than kind of episodic. This thing changes here and this thing changes here. Yeah, nice.
Mm-hmm. Also, am I right in thinking that you were responding directly to the voiceover as well? Like, I think there were particular. The thing that leapt out was faster, stronger. I'm pretty sure the music sped up at that point, right? Yeah. So there were like, I think, because that's something that I didn't necessarily even bother to think about, honestly. So that was really cool. That was a really, really good element. And yeah, as you say, getting kind of thrown in immediately with the groove is kind of quite disarming in a way.
Yeah.
Which is good, right? Because that's kind of, straight away it shows that you've got to try and figure out quick sharp what the hell's going on, as in like, because that's also what the message of the film is kind of trying to
exactly
suggest,
I think
right?
When you were talking about how like you chose to do, I think there's two ways of scoring that sense of lost. Like you were like, I'm gonna keep it sort of without that percussive pulse, and I was like, if it's there already, you're on the train, you're going, you're moving, and now you're like, okay, so what is the rhythm? Let me catch up, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's points where they hit where it feels like it catches up. Where there's like, that's kind of the intention is for you to slot in now with the rhythm, with the pacing of it.
Yeah, and also you elected to start using strings at the cut of the chessboard. Was that like a specific thing?
Because it felt like we've been watching real things the entire time. We watched real shots, and then suddenly we're watching this sort of cinematic, a bird's eye view of a chessboard, which felt very like almost fictional. So to bring in the drama then, this cinematic scoring of strings only then, felt like, you know, a good time to do it. Because if you bring, personally, with the way that I scored it, the minute I brought in strings, it just felt overly dramatic. And from the visuals, personally, I didn't feel the drama. I felt the sense of like motivation and like, oh, like we're trying to get you to come to our boxing ring, you know, not like this is a story for, you know.
Yeah, because I mean, there's also the association with strings being quite sophisticated, and obviously chess is a fairly sophisticated game as well. So I wasn't sure if that was like that link. That's why, like, to go back to mine, that's why I elected to have that kind of like solo violin arpeggiation thing as like just like a. I mean, it's a bit kind of tacked on. It's not quite as well considered as yours, I don't think. But you know, I think those kind of associations can be really, really helpful in terms of just helping deliver on what your intention or vision is. So that was like another moment we thought, okay, that's been thought through really well. Cool. Yeah, it's really, really well put together.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, basically I would just like kind of echo what Toby said earlier about pulling back at the end, the kind of push and pull, and then allowing the silence in the music to play a role. And that really is something that I've especially been trying to do recently, is like just have silent moments. Even just like rests in a bar can just like add so much to the overall score. And like that really is a point that kind of makes or breaks. Like there's a lot of members of the community who will just like go at it, but like just to rise above it, it's like really obvious that you've considered like the story, the narrative, and the push and pull.
Yeah,
nice
I mean,
one.
it's funny because I was talking to Toby about, what was your strategy for creating build, and he said, sort of almost to take stuff out and start from the beginning. And I guess sort of the sort of extreme version of that is to literally start from nothing, from zero, silence. And I think that sometimes it can, specifically with like a sort of trailer like film that we just watched, it can really help after sort of cinematic boom.
Absolutely, yeah. Nice one.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Cool.
Life. It's difficult. It can get too much. Leave you behind. There always comes the moment of choice. And I made mine. I chose to fight. In boxing, we have a creed. The Warrior's Creed. It's like a game of chess. The preparation. Hone your skills. Develop your weapons. Get faster, stronger, smarter. Know your enemy. Then make your move. The creed. Don't get burned.
So this was an interesting one to do because it's sort of a kind of quasi trailer, if you like. So it's quite difficult with these kind of clips, if you like, to sort of figure out what the overall kind of narrative is. And I did feel like with this one, although yes, it does have an overall message, I feel like there was some kind of narrative arc to it, if you know what I mean. So I did sort of try and it's sort of almost got like 2 or 3 build-ups in it, and the kind of points I chose to sort of hit and then pare back a bit were a little bit arbitrary, to be honest. At certain points, I kind of feel like I did some things when I saw a chessboard just because I like chess, but exactly. So and I usually with kind of film scoring, I try and do a sketch first, so I can sort of like figure out where I'm kind of, tempo and like where I'm hitting various things, and and figuring out when I've scored something badly before I actually orchestrate it and try and mix it fully. So there's less problems to solve. But yeah, so I kind of went for a sort of quite a typical sort of epic trailer palette with sort of strings, trombones, horns, percussion, and then 1 or 2 synthy things in there.
Yeah, I thought I liked how you kind of held back the to me, when you got that wide shot of the ring and and they were walking towards each other, then there was this sort of big melody sort of playing, and then after that you had the choir come in. I wanted to know if that was quite an intentional choice to sort of save that for that quite climactic moment in the picture, both with the choir and maybe with that melody.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, I mean, the way I was sort of thinking about it was actually quite a lot of the shots are quite intimate, you know, because you have, you know, you're looking at a chessboard from quite close, or you're looking at, you know, someone, you know, from a, you know, even just a meter or two away, whereas then there was this sort of big shot of the ring, you know, from quite a number of meters away, and I thought, I don't know exactly what it needs here, but I felt like at that point it needed just sort of coming back in a way, not to mean getting quieter, but so I sort of dropped out a lot of the kind of textural, bitty stuff that I had going on and just went for a big kind of paddy sort of brass sound at that point. Yeah,
and it worked quite nicely because a lot of the shots in the clip are sort of slow motion, and so having that sort of big sort of brass melody, worked really well.
Yeah, we can tell you're a brass player, obviously. But I always love hearing kind of low surges, like low chords, because it's just, I mean, the brass section is so good for providing width in that for that exact reason. So those things were super nice, and also I liked. So actually, I think you're the only one of the four of us that actually elected not to have any music playing until we cut to the.
That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. The chap. Which was again that was a really lovely choice, I thought, and yeah, I mean, I think I'm just trying to think of other like individual things, but I think overall, like it was spotted really nicely. Hit certain cuts really well. Mix I thought was good. I didn't have any complaints with that personally.
The speakers were a little bit flattering, to be honest. Actually, I was expecting some
okay.
word. Yeah.
But anyways, it sounded great. The bit that you mentioned at the end of the film. With the wide shot, I think, were you using exclusively brass at that point, or were there other instruments?
There was a little bit of tims, and I kept the first violins working away, as you should.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
They're good. Yeah.
Because actually, that's just reminded me that there was some of the sound design elements that you implemented with like kind of high frequency percussion elements. Yep. Those, because brass playing mezzo forte or below. It's so pad-like and it's so warm that you've got so much space to play with in that iron, and so that you can just dink that stuff in, and it's like you don't have to worry about implementing it or mixing it, because it just sits there really beautifully. So there was some, I think, in terms of instrument combinations and again orchestration, there was some really excellent choices made, I thought.
Yeah, and you mentioned that sort of high. I kind of noticed this with a couple of films where a lot of it's about something to do with your mind, like some kind of intellectual or disciplinary thing. So like, I mean, like The Imitation Game, which is about Turing and like the theory of everything, often have these sort of like arpeggiated kind of piano-y string things. So it's like, it almost feels like the internal cogs working. So I tried to do that, even though the film sort of in a lot of places it visually looks like it's all about kind of physical aggression and all of this. I actually thought it's about your mind as well. So that's why I kept this sort of stuff bubbling away for. Yeah,
it's a great choice, because also like a lot of the best boxers tend to be incredibly like articulate, right? So I think that's another good signposting of that quality, I think. So yeah, really good job. I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, I think on what you were saying about that sort of cogs working, my question was going to be, it really felt like you were connotating to this theme of time, some process happening, and like with scores like for the Imitation Game and those sort of things, it's very much about things locking into gear and then going into the next phase. And there was like this big change in musical palette, when we see the chessboard come in with the piano and the sort of the ticking, and as it moves forward. I think that it's so interesting to see how we've all made use of pacing and time so differently. Like, for example, like my use of percussion is sort of the different changes, and for you it's the slightly different variations of palette, but also with the arpeggiation going through. Was there any sort of adjustment that was an issue, like moving from one to the other, because you move around quite a bit?
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of the time why I try and sketch stuff out, because I think getting things like that it takes quite a lot of trial and error just to get a kind of hit and a transition you feel like works well. So I always try and, like, the first thing I do is basically just a tempo map, like mapping out all the tempo before I've even written a note, so I have a little idea of the music. But then so that's kind of how I try and think about transitions, is I actually think about them quite a bit quite early in the process, so then I don't have to.
It's funny that
think
it also
about
has to
them
do
too
with
much.
time.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, because the palette does kind of progressively get more and more sort of involved and more instruments added, so it's quite a sort of typical layering.
I thought it had, you know, like a really nice build throughout. Like earlier we were talking about this kind of like orchestral shepherd tone that was like something's coming in, something's coming out, like moving away, and that helped to provide like a build throughout that wasn't, you know, didn't get boring at any point basically. And then at the end I thought it had like a really nice payoff.
I kind of feel like harmony actually is really important. I think composers sometimes forget about it a bit. It's sort of my pet subject, but actually putting the right chord in the right place really makes a massive difference, because you can have like exactly the right texture and exactly the right sort of trajectory, but if it's like the wrong chord, it just completely falls flat. So a lot of the time I'm just like, what if this chord goes here instead? And it can change stuff quite a lot without even doing anything else particularly. Yeah,
Great point. Nice. Sweet. And then these guys are going to react to my little piece that I did that you can check out on the middle tier of our website, which is the £5 and above tier, where I do demos of my tracks. So these guys are going to react to the one that I did.
Life. It's difficult. It can get too much. Leave you behind. There always comes that moment. The moment of choice. And I made mine. I chose to fight. In boxing, we have a creed. The warrior's creed. It's like a game of chess. The preparation. Hone your skills. Develop your weapons. Get faster, stronger, smarter. Know your enemy. Then, make your move. The creed. Don't get burned.
So with this piece, I was doing this as a demo for Pteris Vas strings from Orchestral Tools and also a few other libraries, Habitat, Whisper, and one called Babel, which is like a vocal library, which is really nice, which is why you hear the vocal elements in the towards the end. This string library just sounded amazing. So I just wanted this kind of like nice playful theme in the strings. And like, yeah, I was kind of drawn to like a playful idea because I don't know, it feels like boxers can be like a bit cocky and, you know, like showing up to the crowd a little bit. So like this just like nice little thing underscoring it was, you know, what I was drawn to.
Yeah, I think compared to the rest of us, the fact that there was like a melodic approach taken was quite very refreshing, I thought. Yeah, a theme that does stick in one's head was very, very nice. And yeah, so what all of the, because there were also processed vocal sounds as well. So are they from the same library?
From the library Babel.
Okay.
It's just like these, I think it's soprano, alto, and bass. So they didn't record tenor, but
too expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's soprano, alto, and bass, like recorded samples of just like, you know, the normal choral stuff, plus loads of processed like kind of pads and that kind of thing. And then I also added like tremolo and ping pong delay.
It's a beautiful thing.
to a few of them. But yeah,
that's cool. Yeah, because it's interesting that you that playful was a word that you mentioned. Because actually, like when I was listening to it, I kind of thought that it was kind of the music kind of almost sounded like it was a historical kind of basically. So to my ear, it sounded like you were treating boxing as a very, very historical institution, and the way that you have these strings with a very little vibrato is a typical characteristic of how we perform early music, things like Bach, Telemann, Zelenka, all this kind of stuff. And then also with those choral elements as well, which are not actually that operatic in nature. They're still quite kind of tender, I want to say. And also the chant at the end as well. It was a cross between, to me it felt like a cross between sort of early music and almost Gregorian chant in a way. I mean, you don't get that kind of staccato type thing in Gregorian chant, but yeah, it felt very historical, very spiritual, and so playful was kind of it's not necessarily something I would have necessarily picked up on initially, but it's I guess just highlights how differing viewpoints can be to get to the same answer. I guess I don't know, but that was kind of the way that I interpreted it, and. We were saying earlier that the kind of the amount of space around the orchestration means that in terms of mix and dubbing, because dubbing is like quite hard to do, and also as musicians we want to hear our music front and center, like sod the rest of it, but everything sat together super nicely, very very pristine, very clear. It was really really lovely. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I like the fact that you used a lot of the melody throughout. It sort of came back time and time again, because I think it made. Whereas in some of ours, there are different sections, it sort of helped to give a sort of really big continuity to the whole thing, because this melody kept coming back to the extent where it's quite memorable, which is always a good thing. So I think that really helped. And then also your combination of just using a few sort of sounds, so the strings and then the vocal ones, I think that also helped to make it quite contemplative, which I think helped, because there's this sort of chess. Thank you. And yeah, it really did, because it was, I suppose it didn't scratch all the spots we wanted orchestrally or something. And so it sort of made you think more about what are all of these sort of scenes saying and that kind of thing.
Yeah, cheers.
So my question actually is kind of, well, maybe it's more of a comment. It's relating kind of to what Lewis was talking about in terms of maybe history or whatever. It feels a little bit like documentary. That's because there's this big overarching narration, and we're watching stills, and that's kind of obviously how we're used to digesting documentary stuff. So I think that's sort of what the feeling I got might be kind of leading on from what you're saying, is sort of like history, and I think maybe that's what you captured so well in your scoring, is the narrative quality. Because we were all sort of capturing the action, maybe. Much more sort of based on like, what is the next stage? What is the movement? What is the film doing? Whereas you sort of honed in on, I guess you could say, the voice and what is she saying and how she's delivering it, and what is the sort of overarching there. So I think your music felt quite like it was scoring the narration.
Thanks. Yeah. It definitely was something I considered, in that like it just felt too easy to just like kind of go big on like, oh look, this is like a deep dark score, like we're gonna go big on action and stuff. It's because obviously it's about boxers. And then I was like kind of thinking about like, like what is she saying? She's relating it to chess. She's talking about like reading your opponent's moves and that kind of thing, like the more tactical element of boxing and of chess, rather than just like the fact that it's like a blood sport.
But I think it shows you how subjective your everything.
Some of these clips are, absolutely.
I'm curious as to how you feel the sort of compositional process changes with quite a bit of a smaller ensemble than a lot of us use. Like, for example, I was just constantly adding new instrument. Then you end up with basically half an orchestra and a bunch of other stuff as well. But I mean, obviously for this one, you were a bit more restricted to just a string section and some was it vocal libraries as well. Because I mean, with when you have a smaller ensemble like that, or a more intimate one, you kind of really have to sort of get into the instruments a bit more and really use them, kind of bring as much out of the kind of timbre as you can. I mean, how do you feel as though that changed what you might have done had you been able to just sort of throw any old track or any old sound into it?
Yeah, that's a great question, because like obviously I was doing this for a demo, so I wanted to show off the libraries too. Yeah, like there was like a great thing in this library is the mic position. So you had the spot mics and the tree mics. So that like kind of pizzicato cello that you hear in the beginning was like a really nice close mic'd, lovely close up just sound basically. So when I was like testing out the library and like playing with it and that kind of thing, like that instantly hit me. I was like, wow, that sounds gorgeous. So it really was a case of just like playing around, like feeling what really hit me and like really worked, and like just really nailing into like the nicer sounds and that kind of thing, like not just going over the top, and just really focusing on what could work for the video, if that made any sense. You know, just like really focusing it basically onto a smaller ensemble. And cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much to everyone for watching. Talking to the guys at the Royal College was so much fun, so thanks to them. Remember to like, subscribe and ding the bell to be notified when we release more like this on the QTube channel. Remember to head to our website where you can access this clip and plenty more for the low price of £1 a month. That's theqtube.com. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye now.